What about variations in attachment? Nature versus nurture. Kind of a simplified way to take a look at this. You know, those of us that are parents know that it's not all just nurture. You know, kids develop with a little bit of a different temperament. You know, one of my sons was a messy guy from early on, and you know, he couldn't get the food in. The bib was, you know, couldn't contain everything. The other one was very careful. And that wasn't attachment alone. They seem to have a different temperamental style. One's a whole lot more careful about what where he puts things than the other one. And how that pans out has been the area of considerable research, not only by Chess and Thomas, who did those temperament studies in New York, that took a look at the so-called easy child and difficult to soothe and all that, but also Jerome Kagan from Harvard, who has taken a look at the neurodynamics of temperament. And one area that he's looked at is shyness. How shy kids seem to be, and I want to underline this because it's so critical here, overactive on the right prefrontal cortex. Shy temperament styles, overactive on the right prefrontal cortex. Over a period of time, depending on how long you see that temperament. But here's the issue. If you just see it early on, and you go, oh yeah, I remember when you were a kid, you had this temperament style. You've got to see some continuity. Cells that fire together, wire together. The more you do something, the more you're going to do it. The more you have a particular behavioral style, more you're going to see that later on. So if you see it after age 3 or 4, you can be a little bit more confident, and I underline a little bit more confident, that you're going to see that style, whether it be difficult or easy, using Chess and Thomas's descriptions, than if you just see it under age 12 months. So this goodness of fit concept that Chess and Thomas came out with, how well do the parents work with the kids who have these different temperamental styles, is really important. And we developed in the Kaiser system, especially at our Santa Rosa site, a TOTS program that was oriented just around the Chess and Thomas studies, how to work with kids with different temperamental styles. And Jerome Kagan suggests pushing the envelope, because there's this neuroplastic change that can occur, especially with shy kids. My youngest, who's now 19, was the shy one. Now he's more able to stand in front of people and talk than my oldest one, who's going to Washington to be an intern for Dianne Feinstein. My oldest now is more reserved because we encouraged my younger one. We didn't discourage my older one, but encouraged my younger one to kind of get out there, be more comfortable. It's okay. Well, we pushed the envelope with him, and he's better able to be a social person. I'm going to sum up attachment by taking a look at 3 major figures, and we particularly like Donald Winnicott, and especially the concept of good enough mothering. Good enough mothering is a heck of a lot better than perfect mothering, because it lends the opportunity to repair ruptures in the relationships, and that's where people learn. Not when you got a perfect environment, because you don't learn anything at all. So he, like Bowlby, were students or were supervised by Melanie Klein. And back in England during the 30s and early 40s, you know, you had the big war between Anna Freud and Melanie Klein. And Melanie Klein kind of got upset with them wanting to leave the analyst environment and go out and really study real kids in other environments. And they contributed a heck of a lot. John Bowlby, of course, got that research grant to study all these orphans from World War II. And Mary Ainsworth, who had just come to England with her husband from Toronto. In Toronto, she was working with Bruno Kleffer, if I can pronounce his last name right, who, remember, there were, before Beck, with the Rorschach, there were two competing schools, you know, the Beck, not Aaron Beck, but the Beck model of scoring the Rorschach and the Jungian model of scoring the Rorschach. Well, Mary Ainsworth was studying with him, and all of a sudden now she's in England, answers an ad to take a look at these babies, and she and Bowlby worked together at taking a look at attachment relationships. Before she returned to the United States, she looked at attachment styles in Uganda. Ended up at Johns Hopkins and later at University of Virginia, and she was the one that developed the so-called infant strange situation that is really the paradigm or the model for taking a look at attachment relationships and its various incarnations later on that identifies those particular attachment relationships. So let me sum up this. What did they learn besides all the stuff that we've read out in the developmental literature about the various attachment styles? Kids who have anxious attachment seem to be overactive on the right prefrontal cortex. Themes developing here. Remember, we were talking about shy kids, temperament style, right prefrontal cortex, attachment style, activated, especially if they're anxious attachment, overactivated on the right prefrontal cortex. Strofe from University of Minnesota and a number of other people have taken a look at kids longitudinally for about 30 years, same group of people, tried to weigh out what are the differential effects of both temperament and attachment, found that not only what I was talking about before was really important in terms of how long you can identify the temperamental style, but it seems that these attachment relationships have a bit of a more powerful influence, seem to have more continuity. Interesting, you know, this battle between nature and nurture, we're saying nurtured nature instead of nurture versus nature, but how important attachment relationships are and how that neurodynamically plays out. It's important for us because we're dealing with folks that have anxiety disorders and depression and all that. Here we find that those precursors to anxiety and depression neurodynamically correlate with attachment styles as well that play out over the lifespan. Let's briefly, in closure, talk about international efforts to take a look at attachment. And for example, there's more avoidant attachment styles in Germany. Interesting. I was in Oslo a couple weeks ago at a conference, and then later down in Copenhagen visiting a friend, and mentioned this, and it was said that when Hillary Clinton went out, in this case to Denmark, she got all upset that somebody left the stroller out and went into the market. And in fact, that's very common in Germany, to leave the stroller and go into the market. We would never do that. You know, we're worried about abductors and all sorts of things. Now, very common in Germany. Interesting that more avoidant attachment styles there, whereas in Japan, more ambivalent attachment styles, and it's rare that you get a babysitter. And if the babysitter's there, it's the grandma, you know, or the grandpa. So you get more ambivalent attachment styles. And on the kibbutzim, you get more stranger anxiety. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you know, the environment really creates this. I lived on a kibbutz for a while, and it was about 35 years ago, and you know, that's when the early terrorist attacks, they weren't suicide bombers, they were guys with guns coming in and just shooting up people and everything. And so everybody was hyper vigilant to strangers, and so you get a whole lot of xenophobia there, and the kids pick it up over a period of time. Perfect is not good enough. It's good enough that we really want to be with one another, and certainly with development, because it's the repairing of the impingements, it's the repairing of those ruptures that are really critical, not only in attachment relationships, but I'm now saying in many ways, being with ourselves good enough. I mean, we're always, I mean, I'm my own best critic. If I can, and all of you can be incorporating that idea that, well, you know, you're never going to be perfect anyway, but if you could just try your hardest and be good enough, you can be a little bit more at ease. I mean, you just do your best, so to speak. And it relates to attachment in many ways.